That morning, the sky was perfectly clear, yet a storm none of my neighbors could see had already torn through my life. An email, just one line of cold text, flashed across my screen while I was at work. My hands trembled as I clicked it open, not yet realizing how those words would dismantle everything I thought I knew. He claimed he had fallen for someone else. He said he was startin' fresh. But hidden between those words was something far worse than betrayal. It wasn't only my marriage he intended to abandon. It was everything I had sacrificed, every dollar I had worked for, every promise he once made. The luxury vehicle I had taken a loan for, gone. Our savings I had spent years building, vanished overnight, and the man I had once trusted more than anyone had disappeared without leaving so much as a shadow behind. As my 10-year-old son watched me sink under the weight of silence, I knew I couldn't hide the truth forever. But what I didn't expect was his reaction. Simon wasn't devastated. He wasn't even surprised. Instead, he calmly suggested something that would flip my world upside down once again. A plan, so precise, so daring, that it made me wonder if I had underestimated my own child all along. And when we finally put that plan into motion, the truth we uncovered shattered even the lies my husband thought he could control. Before I reveal everything, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because what happened next will leave you speechless. I wasn't born into privilege. My life had always been stitched together with sacrifices and silent battles no one else ever saw. Long before Patrick, long before the word betrayal was carved into my chest like a wound that wouldn't close, there was only me, Diana, fighting to survive. I grew up in a cramped apartment where walls were thin and nights were louder than days. My parents argued about money so often that the sound of breaking plates became more familiar to me than lullabies. My father worked temporary jobs, never steady, always leaving us hanging on the edge of eviction notices. My mother tried, she truly did, but exhaustion bent her back until she became just another shadow in the kitchen. I learned early on that if I wanted something, food, books, even peace, I had to earn it myself. When I was 16, while other girls dreamed of dances and dresses, I scrubbed tables at a dingy diner until my hands smelled of bleach. Customers rarely looked me in the eye, but I didn't care. Every tip, every dollar bill tucked into my apron was proof that I could endure. I would save enough to escape. I told myself that one day I would build a different kind of life, one where no child would ever hear hunger echo through their stomach like a second heartbeat. And then Patrick appeared. He wasn't extraordinary, not at first glance, but he smiled in a way that suggested he understood the weariness in me. He said he admired my determination, how I refused to crumble. He promised that together, we could rewrite the script life had handed us. I wanted so badly to believe him. Maybe that was my first mistake. We married in a modest ceremony, no frills, no gold bands glinting like royalty. Just vows whispered in the presence of a few friends. Patrick was restless, hopping between jobs, but I convinced myself it was only temporary. I had a steady office position, and when Simon was born, I felt a joy so fierce it swallowed every doubt I carried. My son's tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and in that moment, I swore I would never let him feel the same neglect I had endured as a child. But reality was cruel. Patrick's instability became a constant storm. He worked for months at a time, then quit over small conflicts, declaring he deserved better. I carried the weight of bills, rent, and childcare on my shoulders, smiling through exhaustion so Simon would never see my fear. Nights were the worst. When Simon was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with bills spread before me, counting pennies while Patrick snored in the other room, oblivious to the sacrifices I was bleeding out. I thought love meant patience. I thought marriage meant endurance. Even when Patrick disappeared for weekends, claiming he needed space, I stayed quiet. When he came back smelling of perfume that wasn't mine, I told myself I was paranoid. My love for Simon tethered me to the illusion of family, no matter how fractured it became. Still, there were fleeting moments when I hoped Patrick might change, when he held Simon and promised to be better, when he surprised us with cheap gifts, his eyes shining with charm. Those small glimpses of the man I married kept me chained to him far longer than I should have been. And then came the dream he painted so vividly, buying a camper van, traveling as a family, making memories together. I hesitated, worried about finances, but Patrick was persuasive. He convinced me that life was too short not to take risks, that Simon deserved to see the world, not just the walls of our modest apartment. So I signed the loan in my name, $35,000. Every signature felt like a knife, but I trusted Patrick's promise that he'd help with the repayments. I wanted to believe this was a turning point, that maybe, finally, we would live the life I always imagined for Simon. But dreams are fragile things, and mine shattered in a single day. The email arrived like lightning, setting everything ablaze. Patrick announced, almost casually, that he had found someone else. Giselle. A woman I barely knew, a colleague from his short-lived job. He wasn't just leaving me. He was leaving Simon, leaving the life we had built, leaving behind every sacrifice I had made. And as if betrayal wasn't enough, he revealed his true cruelty. He intended to keep the camper van, since it was delivered under my name, and I, his discarded wife, would handle the crushing repayments. In that moment, I felt my soul collapse. I remembered the nights I had gone without meals so Simon could eat. I remembered the years I carried Patrick's failures like a second skin. And this was the man I had trusted with my heart, my family, my future. When Simon noticed my hollow eyes and trembling hands, he asked if I was sick. I lied. I said I was tired, but children see more than we think. Simon, sharp and observant, confronted me gently, forcing me to confess. I expected tears. I expected anger. Instead, his small voice, steady and calm, said, "It's just like Dad, but we'll be fine, Mom. You'll see." Those words pierced deeper than Patrick's betrayal. Because my child, the boy who should have been shielded from such pain, was the one comforting me. But my body couldn't lie. The weight of everything crushed me until I collapsed at work. Waking up in a sterile hospital room with IV lines in my arm. The doctor's expression was serious. Stress had carved sickness into me, and surgery was the only option. As I lay beneath white lights, tears slipping down my temples, I thought of Simon, his wide eyes, his stubborn courage, his unwavering love. I told myself I had no right to break, not when he depended on me, not when he was the only piece of purity left in my shattered world. So I endured the surgery. I endured the long nights alone in the hospital bed. I endured the fear that I wouldn't wake up, and when I finally returned home, weaker but alive, reality struck me like a hammer. My account had been drained. The 20,000 I had scraped together over years was gone. Patrick had taken it. My name was chained to a debt I couldn't pay. My savings vanished, and the man who once vowed to protect me had erased every trace of loyalty. It was in that moment, when everything seemed darkest, that Simon placed his small hand over mine and whispered the words that would change everything. "Mom, don't give up. We'll get it all back. I have a plan." And for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark ignite inside me. Not hope in Patrick, not hope in promises, but hope in my son. Life has a strange way of forcing you to grow stronger in the very moments you feel the weakest. After surgery, after the debt notices, after every betrayal Patrick had left carved into my skin like scars, I thought I had reached the end of myself. But sometimes, when you are stripped of everything, that is when you finally see what remains unbreakable. For me, that was Simon. My son, only 10 years old, became my anchor in the storm. He never once complained about the cheap meals I scraped together or the second-hand clothes we now had to rely on. Instead, he stepped into our broken routine with a quiet resilience that humbled me. Every morning, before I even stirred from bed, he had already packed his school bag, brushed his teeth, and prepared his own breakfast. After school, he helped with chores, sometimes even humming softly as if he wanted to lighten my burden. Watching him adapt reminded me of the promise I made when he was born, that I would create a life better than the one I had as a child. And even though Patrick had taken so much from us, Simon reminded me that I still had everything worth fighting for. Slowly, my body regained strength. I returned to my job, though I had to move carefully, pacing myself so I wouldn't collapse again. My colleagues, once just passing faces in an office, began treating me with respect I hadn't felt before. They knew what I had gone through. They had seen me nearly break, and now they admired how I came back. Thinner, paler, yes, but still standing. And something unexpected happened. The company where I had been working quietly for years offered me an opportunity. They had seen my dedication, my long nights, my refusal to give up even when I was in pain. They promoted me, giving me a position that not only paid better, but also gave me authority. For the first time, I wasn't just an exhausted employee surviving paycheck to paycheck. I was someone who had a voice, who could make decisions, who could shape the direction of our department. The extra income was a blessing. It didn't erase the debt instantly, but it meant I could breathe. It meant Simon could continue his after-school activities, his love for science clubs, his endless fascination with building small gadgets from scraps. Watching his eyes light up when he showed me his projects filled me with a joy deeper than any luxury Patrick once promised. At home, we found comfort in small victories, cooking simple meals together, turning our cramped apartment into a place of warmth with Simon's drawings taped proudly on the fridge, laughing at silly jokes late at night when the world outside felt too heavy. I realized then that success wasn't measured by wealth or cars or grand vacations. Success was the ability to smile again, to find peace in the company of someone who truly loved you. Patrick's betrayal had forced me into the hospital. It had drained my savings. It had left me drowning in debt. But it had also burned away the illusions I once clung to. I no longer wasted energy wishing he would change. I no longer dreamed of a marriage that could be salvaged. Instead, I focused on the future Simon and I could build, one step at a time, hand in hand. And in those moments, as I watched Simon's determination mirror my own, I realized something powerful. We weren't victims. Not anymore. We were survivors. And soon, we would be more than that. We would be the ones to take back everything stolen from us. The first time I saw Patrick again, it wasn't at home, and it wasn't by chance. It was 3 months after he had vanished, leaving me to face hospital walls, debt notices, and Simon's questions alone. By then, I had built enough strength to stand tall again, though the wound he left still pulsed beneath the surface. That morning, I had just finished a meeting at the office when my phone buzzed. The number flashing on the screen made my stomach twist. Against my better judgment, I answered, "Diana, it's me. Please, I need your help." His voice was desperate, trembling. For a second, the old me, the one who used to rush to patch his mistakes, almost answered with concern, but that version of me was gone. "Who might this be?" I said coldly. "Don't play games. It's Patrick. The police. They've been questioning me about the van, about the loan, about you. If this keeps going, they'll drag me to the station. Just come. We need to talk." I didn't respond right away. My silence stretched long enough that Simon, sitting beside me in the office cafeteria, looked up from his notebook. His eyes narrowed with a sharpness beyond his years. "Mom," he whispered, "this is our chance." And I knew he was right. We traced Patrick's location using the GPS app Simon had installed months earlier. To my surprise, he hadn't fled across the country like I imagined. He was barely an hour away, hiding in a forest park where campers often stayed. I wondered if he thought the trees would shield him from his lies. When we arrived, the scene felt almost surreal. Patrick was standing beside the camper van, my van, looking cornered as 2 police officers asked him questions. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his expression that same mix of arrogance and fear I remembered too well. The moment he saw me, he relaxed, almost smirking. "Finally," he muttered, waving the officers off. "We need privacy. This is between husband and wife." The words stung, but I reminded myself. He had filed for divorce, his own choice. He was no longer my husband in anything but paper. Inside the van, the air was thick with tension. Giselle sat cross-legged on the seat, her eyes sharp and smug, as if daring me to speak. Patrick gestured for Simon and me to sit, his voice lowered. "Look, I know things got messy, but you need to drop this police nonsense. We're still family. You wouldn't want Simon to see his father dragged away in handcuffs, would you?" Simon leaned forward, his small voice steady but cutting. "Family? You left us. You stole from Mom. You're not acting like a father at all." Patrick flinched as if struck. Giselle scoffed, tossing her hair. "Don't blame him, kid. He just chose better. Look at me. I'm younger, prettier, more exciting than your mother." "That's why he left." Simon's gaze turned icy. "Quiet. I wasn't asking you." For the first time, Giselle's smirk faltered. Patrick shifted uncomfortably. "Simon, don't talk to her like that." "No," Simon said firmly. "You answer. Why did you abandon us? Why steal from us?" Patrick's jaw tightened. He muttered excuses about love, about starting fresh, about how I was holding him back. But every word rang hollow. I finally spoke. "Patrick, listen carefully. You filed for divorce. That means, legally, you and I are strangers. Which means that camper van outside, you driving it without permission, makes you a thief. The money you drained from my account? That's theft, too. I was kind enough to ask the police to step aside so we could talk. But unless you make things right, they'll be back." His face paled. For the first time, I saw the cracks in his confidence. Giselle shifted in her seat, her hand protectively resting on her stomach. That's when Simon's sharp eyes narrowed again. "By the way," he said slowly, "when's the baby due?" The room went silent. 3 months, Giselle snapped. I tilted my head, my voice calm but razor sharp. 3 months? But you and Patrick only met 3 months ago? How is that possible? Patrick's head whipped toward her. What? Color drained from his face as the truth dawned. You mean it's not mine? Giselle rolled her eyes, her bravado crumbling. Don't be stupid. Did you really think you were the only one? You were just convenient. You fell for everything I said. The argument that followed was ugly, venomous. Patrick shouted. Giselle spat insults, both exposing themselves in front of Simon and me. And I didn't stop them. I wanted every mask stripped away. Then, as if the humiliation wasn't enough, the final blow arrived. Giselle's parents appeared at the van door, their faces red with fury. Simon had contacted them days earlier, telling them everything. Now they stood there, condemning their daughter, disowning her for disgracing their family. Patrick looked trapped, betrayed by the very woman he had chosen over me. Giselle screamed, but her parents' words silenced her. We will not support a daughter who destroys families. For the first time in years, I felt something close to justice. Patrick begged then, pathetic, trembling, promising to change, to work, to pay back what he owed. But I saw him clearly now, and I knew the time for begging was over. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. About showing Simon that no matter how deep the betrayal, strength would always rise again. And so I stood, looking at Patrick and Giselle with a calm they couldn't shatter, and said the words that sealed their fate. You made your choices. Now you live with the consequences. After that encounter in the forest park, I knew the story wasn't over. Patrick's words, Giselle's lies, and the shameful truth spilling from both of them weren't enough. I needed more than apologies, more than their family's condemnation. I needed proof. Solid evidence that would hold them accountable, not only in my eyes, but also in the eyes of the law. Because without evidence, Patrick would twist the truth again, and Giselle would walk away smirking. And I refused to give them that satisfaction. That night, when Simon was supposed to be asleep, I found him sitting at the kitchen table, a notebook open in front of him. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, arrows, and diagrams. At first, I thought he was doing schoolwork, but when I leaned closer, I saw names, dates, and places. What's this? I asked softly. Simon looked up, his eyes clear and determined. It's our plan, Mom. If we want to make Dad pay for what he did, we can't just rely on what we saw today. We need to gather everything. The money, the car, the affair, all of it. That way, he can't lie his way out. I stared at him, amazed. He was only 10, but he spoke with the composure of someone far older. My heart ached, knowing he had to grow up so quickly, forced into battles he should never have faced. But at the same time, pride swelled in me. My son was brilliant, and his brilliance would be our weapon. Over the next few days, we began quietly testing the waters. I started with the bank. I requested detailed transaction histories for the joint account Patrick had emptied. At first, the clerk hesitated, citing privacy rules. But when I reminded her that my name was on the account and that I had already reported unauthorized withdrawals, she relented. Holding those papers in my hands felt like holding a knife carved out of truth. Patrick hadn't only taken the $20,000, He had been withdrawing small amounts for weeks, meals at expensive restaurants, jewelry purchases, and hotels I had never heard of. Simon read over my shoulder, his brow furrowed. "See? It matches. I checked his phone location history from before you deleted his account access. The times he went missing line up with these transactions." The realization that my 10-year-old son had thought to cross-check GPS logs with bank withdrawals shook me. I whispered, "Simon, you shouldn't have to do this." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but if I don't, who will? We're a team, Mom." The next test was the camper van. I called the dealership and requested all documentation about the purchase. When they confirmed the van was legally registered under my name, my suspicion hardened into certainty. Patrick couldn't argue ownership. He had tried to convince me that marriage gave him rights to it, but on paper, it was mine alone. That meant his driving it without my consent was theft. Simon wasn't done. He said, "We need witnesses too, people who saw him with Giselle. Otherwise, he'll say we're making things up." So, I quietly reached out to one of Patrick's old coworkers, a woman named Laura, who had always smiled politely at office parties. When I explained what happened, her voice lowered into a whisper. She told me she remembered seeing Patrick and Giselle at the welcome party. Too close, too intimate for colleagues. She also recalled Patrick bragging weeks later about big plans with a new woman, though he never used her name. I asked if she would be willing to repeat her words in front of a lawyer. There was hesitation, but when I told her what Patrick had done, stealing money from me, abandoning Simon, she agreed. Meanwhile, Simon took it upon himself to test something riskier. He logged into an old messaging app Patrick had once set up on the family computer, still linked to his email. To my shock, messages appeared, lines of conversation between Patrick and Giselle. Their words were dripping with arrogance, mocking me, mocking Simon, planning trips with money that wasn't theirs. Simon printed every exchange, sliding the stack of papers toward me like treasure. My hands shook as I read them. "Simon, this could be dangerous. If he finds out you access this..." "Then we'll already have what we need," he interrupted. His voice was calm, steady, unflinching. I realized then how much Simon had changed. He wasn't just a boy anymore. He was sharpening himself into something stronger, something Patrick would never break. But Patrick wasn't blind. A week later, he called again, his tone no longer desperate but defensive. "I know what you're doing," he hissed into the phone. "Digging into my accounts, talking to people. Stop it, Diana. You don't want to make this uglier than it already is." I almost laughed. "Patrick, it's already ugly. You made sure of that." "You think you'll win? Without me, you're nothing. You can't prove half the things you're claiming." His arrogance fueled my resolve, because he was wrong. With every test we had run, every document, every screenshot, every witness, we were building a case stronger than his hollow threats. That night, Simon looked at me with a seriousness that made my chest tighten. "Mom, Dad still thinks we're weak. Let's prove to him we're not." I nodded. The testing phase was over. The evidence was starting to stack in our favor. And deep down, I knew Patrick was beginning to realize his biggest mistake wasn't leaving me. It was underestimating the strength of the woman and child he left behind. Once the first layer of truth was peeled back, I realized how much deeper I needed to dig. Testing the waters had shown me that Patrick's betrayal wasn't a single act of weakness, but a calculated series of choices. Choices that drained my savings, chained me with debt, and humiliated me in front of our son. If I wanted to break free and ensure he paid for every cut he carved into our lives, I needed undeniable proof, evidence so solid that even his slippery words couldn't escape it. I began with the financial trail. The bank statements I had already collected were only the beginning. Over late nights, with Simon curled beside me, I pored through each line of transactions. There were not just restaurants and hotels, but also large ATM withdrawals at odd hours. I highlighted every suspicious entry, creating a timeline that exposed Patrick's double life in cold black ink. Simon, ever methodical, cross-referenced the data with the GPS records he had quietly saved. Each location matched perfectly. Every withdrawal was tied to a night he told me he was working late. The discovery burned, but it also strengthened me. Next came the workplace. I reached out to more of Patrick's former colleagues. Some ignored me, afraid of being dragged into drama. But a few, touched by Simon's bravery when he accompanied me and explained why we needed their help, agreed to speak. One man remembered seeing Patrick slip out of the office hand in hand with Giselle. Another recalled them returning from lunch together, laughing in a way that spoke of intimacy, not professionalism. I documented every testimony, careful to record dates and details. Simon surprised me one evening by pulling out his school laptop. "Mom," he said, "I think I can access Dad's cloud drive. He once shared a folder with me for homework. He probably forgot to remove me." My heart pounded. "Simon, that could be dangerous." But it was too late. His fingers danced across the keyboard, and within moments, images flooded the screen. Photos of Patrick and Giselle at beach resorts, dinners, even one of them posing proudly beside the camper van I had signed my life away for. My chest tightened as I stared, but I forced myself not to look away. Proof wasn't supposed to be painless. We printed the photos. Each page felt like a nail in the coffin of the man I once loved. I also went back to the dealership, insisting on copies of all purchase documents. There it was, stamped and sealed. The van was legally mine. That alone gave me leverage Patrick couldn't deny. Meanwhile, Simon continued gathering digital evidence. He saved chat logs, screenshots of Patrick promising Giselle trips once Diana's money clears, and even one message where Giselle mocked me directly. "She's too weak to fight back. By the time she notices, we'll already be gone." Simon handed me the printout with steady hands. "They underestimated you, Mom. They underestimated us." But there was one more layer missing. Giselle's parents. They had already confronted their daughter once, thanks to Simon's clever maneuvering. But I needed them to officially confirm what they knew, that Giselle had been pregnant before Patrick entered the picture, that the timeline of her lies would expose both of them in front of the law. I arranged a quiet meeting with them. At first, they were reluctant, embarrassed by their daughter's actions. But when I showed them the evidence, the money stolen, the photos, the messages, they shook their heads in disgust. Giselle's mother whispered, "She has always been reckless, but to ruin another family, to steal, we cannot protect her." They agreed to testify, if it came to that. Another pillar of truth added to our growing wall. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. Patrick thought he was building a new life in the shadows, but all along, Simon and I were following, collecting the crumbs he carelessly dropped. By the end of 2 weeks, we had assembled a file thick with documents, images, testimonies, and digital logs. I placed it all into a binder, heavy in my hands, but light on my heart. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt control return to me. One evening, Simon climbed into my lap, even though he was almost too big for it now. "Mom," he said softly, "when Dad left, I thought we were going to lose everything. But now, I think we're winning." Tears pricked my eyes, but I forced a smile. Not winning yet, but soon. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were preparing. Patrick and Giselle had played their game recklessly, thinking I was too broken to fight back. But the evidence we had gathered was a weapon sharp enough to cut through every excuse, every lie. And when the time came, we would use it. Once the binder of evidence sat on our kitchen table, thick and undeniable, I realized it was no longer just about proving Patrick's betrayal. It was about reclaiming everything he had tried to steal. My dignity, my savings, my future with Simon. Retribution wasn't born from anger alone. It was born from the quiet determination that we would never again be his victims. Late at night, when the world outside had gone still, Simon and I spread the documents across the table like pieces of a chessboard. "We can't just throw this at him," Simon said, his young voice steady but sharp. "If we show our hand too early, he'll find a way to twist it. We need to corner him so he has nowhere to run." I nodded, tracing my finger across the receipts, the photos, the messages. "So, how do we do that?" Simon leaned closer, his eyes gleaming with a cunning that startled me. "We use his own arrogance against him. He still thinks he's smarter than you, that you'll forgive him or give up. If we let him think that for a little longer, he'll walk straight into our trap." The plan began to take shape. Step 1 was securing legal backing. I contacted a lawyer, an older woman named Mrs. Callahan, known for her relentless pursuit of justice in family disputes. She listened quietly as I laid out everything, her face unreadable. Then, when Simon proudly slid the binder toward her, her expression changed. She flipped through the pages, nodding slowly. "This," she said, tapping the photos of Patrick and Giselle beside the camper van, "is more than enough to prove theft. And these bank records, combined with the messages, show clear financial misconduct. Diana, if you take this to court, not only will you divorce him cleanly, you'll recover damages." Hearing those words was like breathing for the first time in months. But Simon wasn't satisfied. "We don't just want to win in court," he insisted. "We want him to feel the weight of what he did. Everyone should know the truth." Mrs. Callahan raised an eyebrow, but I understood my son. Retribution wasn't about humiliation for its own sake. It was about stripping Patrick of the illusions he clung to, forcing him to face the consequences he had always run from. So, step 2 was exposure. Quietly, we reached out to the colleagues who had already agreed to testify, asking them to prepare written statements. We also arranged for copies of the messages to be notarized, so Patrick couldn't claim they were fabricated. Each layer made our case stronger, tighter, harder to escape. Simon suggested step 3, an ambush, not with fists or shouting, but with truth. "He thinks he can keep both lives running at once," Simon explained. "If we bring everyone together, the police, Giselle's parents, his co-workers, he'll be trapped. He won't be able to lie if everyone hears the truth at the same time." The boldness of it made me pause, but the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. Patrick had always thrived in shadows, whispering one thing to me, another to Giselle, another to his friends. If we dragged him into the light, those shadows would vanish, so we set the trap. I called Patrick, feigning hesitation in my voice. Maybe we can talk again. Not with the police. Just us, for Simon's sake. As expected, his tone softened immediately. Finally, you're being reasonable. Yes, let's talk. I'll make things right. You'll see. He had no idea that while I spoke, Simon was already sending messages, coordinating with Giselle's parents, updating Mrs. Callahan, and confirming the police would be nearby. The stage was being built, and Patrick was walking right into it. In the days leading up to the meeting, I wrestled with fear. What if Patrick turned violent? What if Giselle caused a scene? But every time doubt crept in, Simon reminded me, we're not alone anymore. We have the truth. And we have people who believe us. On the night before the confrontation, I sat at Simon's bedside, watching him sleep. His face, peaceful in the glow of his lamp, reminded me why I was doing all of this. Not for revenge alone, but for him. For the boy who had held my hand in the hospital, who had whispered that we would get through this, who had refused to let me collapse under Patrick's betrayal. Tomorrow, I whispered into the quiet room, we take back our lives. When morning came, I wasn't the same woman Patrick had left months ago. I wasn't broken, trembling, or afraid. I was ready. And as Simon and I stepped out of the apartment together, binder in hand, I realized something powerful. Our plan wasn't just about punishing Patrick. It was about proving to him, to Giselle, to the world, and even to ourselves, that we had survived, and that survival had sharpened us into something unshakable. The park was quiet that afternoon, but my heart thundered as though drums echoed beneath the trees. The meeting place wasn't chosen by chance. It was the same forest park where Patrick had once stood smugly beside the camper van, thinking he had won. Today, he would face the truth he could no longer run from. When Simon and I arrived, the air felt heavier, charged with anticipation. Mrs. Callahan was nearby with the police, waiting discreetly. Giselle's parents stood a little distance away, their faces carved with fury and disappointment. One by one, the people Patrick had deceived were gathering like witnesses at an execution. Patrick arrived late, as if he still believed the world would wait for him. He stepped out of the van with false confidence, his shirt half tucked, hair slicked back in an attempt to look composed. But as soon as his eyes swept across the crowd, his mask cracked. His jaw clenched, his smile faltered, and sweat glistened at his temple. "Diana," he began, forcing charm into his voice, "you didn't tell me this would be a reunion." Simon stepped forward before I could answer. His small frame stood firm, his voice cutting through the air. "We wanted everyone to hear the truth at the same time, so you can't lie anymore." Patrick's face twisted. He tried to laugh, but it came out jagged. "What truth? You're confused, son. I was only—" "Stop," I interrupted, my voice cold. "We have everything. The bank records, the photos, the messages. You stole my savings, took the van, and paraded around with Giselle, while Simon and I were left with nothing. And now you will answer for it." The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Then Giselle emerged from the van. She wore a bright red dress, her makeup thick, her chin lifted defiantly, but her eyes betrayed unease. When she spotted her parents, her bravado faltered. "Mom? Dad? What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. Her mother's glare could have turned stone to dust. "We're here because Diana told us the truth, because you shamed this family. You stole, you lied, and worst of all, you trapped yourself in a pregnancy lie." Patrick's head snapped toward Giselle, his face contorted in horror. Pregnancy lie? What are they talking about? The silence that followed was crushing. Giselle shifted, her hands nervously clutching her stomach. She tried to smirk, but it came out warped. It doesn't matter. You love me, Patrick. That's all that matters. But her words only deepened his humiliation. His hand shook, his face blotched red with fury and despair. For the first time, he looked smaller than I had ever seen him, like a boy caught stealing, not a man who once thought he held power over me. Simon's voice pierced the air again, steady and merciless. You left us for her. You called her better, but she never cared about you. You gave up your family, your money, everything, for nothing. Patrick's shoulders slumped. His once proud stance collapsed into a hunch, his eyes darting helplessly between me, Simon, and Giselle's parents. Sweat trickled down his forehead. His lips trembled as though words failed him for the first time in his life. Giselle fared no better. Her painted face streaked as tears cut through her mascara. She tried to reach for Patrick's arm, but he shook her off violently, as if she were poison. Her knees wobbled, and for the first time, her arrogance melted into raw fear. The police stepped forward then, their presence looming. One officer announced, "We have reports of theft and financial fraud. Patrick, you'll need to come with us for questioning." Patrick stumbled back, shaking his head. No, this isn't happening. Diana, please, tell them this is just a misunderstanding. For Simon's sake. But Simon answered before I could. His voice didn't tremble. For my sake? You don't get to use me anymore. You lost that right. The words struck him harder than any slap could. Patrick's face collapsed into despair, his knees nearly buckling. Giselle tried to flee, but her parents blocked her path. Her father's voice thundered, "You're not welcome in our home. You're not welcome in our lives. You've disgraced us enough." Her legs gave way, and she sank onto the dirt, her dress gathering dust, her sobs echoing weakly through the trees. The once smug mistress was nothing more than a broken figure, her beauty crumbling with every tear. Patrick, dragged toward the police car, looked back at me one last time. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, his posture bent like a man twice his age. Gone was the arrogance, the swagger, the careless laughter. What remained was only a shell, pathetic, pitiful, and despised. And as I stood there, Simon by my side, I felt no pity, only justice. The aftermath of that day spread like wildfire. Once Patrick and Giselle were escorted away, the truth refused to stay hidden. Word traveled quickly, from neighbors who had seen the police cars, from co-workers who whispered about the affair, from Giselle's own parents who no longer shielded her shame. What began as private betrayal soon became public disgrace. Patrick's life unraveled first. At the factory where Mrs. Callahan helped place him for steady work, his record of theft and financial misconduct followed him like a shadow. Employers refused to trust him. When he did find temporary shifts, his wages were garnished. Every month, deductions cut away, funneling directly into my account as repayment for the money and child support. He became a man working not to build his own life, but to fund the life he had tried to destroy. Each paycheck was a reminder that he no longer controlled his future. But money was only part of his punishment. His reputation, once carefully crafted with charm, crumbled. Friends avoided him. Even his own relatives distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with a man branded both adulterer and thief. The same man who once strutted with false confidence now walked the streets with hunched shoulders, his eyes darting nervously as whispers followed him. Worse still was the decline in his health. Stress carved deep lines into his face, his weight dropped, and the arrogance that once radiated from him dissolved into a hollow, gaunt expression. Every time I saw him, sometimes in court hearings, sometimes passing through the city, he looked older, weaker, more broken. The Patrick who once believed he could abandon us and rise higher had instead dug his own grave. Giselle fared no better, abandoned by her parents, disowned publicly. She was left without a safety net. The apartment she once boasted about sharing with Patrick was gone when the landlord evicted them for unpaid rent. I heard through the grapevine that she drifted between acquaintances, begging for a couch to sleep on. Her once flawless beauty, which she weaponized to lure Patrick, faded under the weight of stress and poverty. Heavy makeup could no longer hide the dark circles beneath her eyes or the bitterness that warped her features. And then came the cruelest revelation. The man she had claimed fathered her child walked away the moment the truth surfaced. Pregnant, abandoned, and disgraced, Giselle was left to bear the weight of her lies alone. The same woman who once sneered at me, flaunting her supposed superiority, was now pitied by strangers and despised by those who knew her story. The community's judgment was harsh. At the grocery store, whispers followed her. At clinics, nurses exchanged knowing glances. No one offered sympathy. She had burned too many bridges, and now every flame turned against her. For me, watching their downfall wasn't about gloating. It was about balance being restored. For so long, I had felt powerless under their betrayal, drowning in debt, illness, and despair. But now, each day they faced consequences, I felt lighter. Justice wasn't abstract anymore. It was visible, tangible, undeniable. Simon, too, noticed. "Mom," he said one evening as we cooked dinner together, "do you think Dad understands now that what he did can't be undone?" I stirred the pot slowly, considering. "I think he understands, Simon. But understanding doesn't erase choices. He'll carry those consequences for the rest of his life." Patrick's punishment wasn't a quick downfall. It was slow, relentless erosion. He lost his career, his dignity, his health, and the illusion of control. Giselle lost her family, her reputation, her stability, and the mask of superiority she once wore. Together, they were no longer the smug pair who believed they could destroy me and walk away untouched. They were outcasts, abandoned even by each other. And in that destruction, I found peace. Because while they crumbled, Simon and I rose. Our home grew warmer. Our laughter returned. The fear that once clung to me like a second skin finally released its grip. And every time I received a child support payment deducted from Patrick's meager wages, I smiled, not out of greed, but out of certainty. Certainty that the man who once tried to erase us was now forced to build us back, brick by brick, with the sweat of his labor. It was poetic. It was just. And above all, it was final. Months passed, and the sharp edges of pain began to soften. The house that once felt heavy with silence now echoed with laughter again. Simon and I built new routines, simple yet beautiful. Shared breakfast before school, evening walks where he told me about his latest science project, weekends spent watching movies curled under the same blanket. The debt that had once strangled me no longer held the same weight. Piece by piece, payment by payment, freedom returned. I sold the camper van that had nearly destroyed us, turning it into a symbol of resilience rather than regret. With the savings I rebuilt, Simon and I even planned a small trip together. Not far, not extravagant, but ours. A memory we chose, not one forced on us by betrayal. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about Patrick and Giselle. Not with longing, not even with anger, just a distant acknowledgement. Their lives were no longer intertwined with mine. Their downfall was theirs to bear, and my life no longer revolved around them. Instead, my gaze was fixed forward, toward Simon's future, toward the life we could shape together with honesty and strength, toward the promise that no matter what storms came, we would stand side by side, unshaken. As I looked at my son's sleeping face one evening, a soft smile curved my lips. "We made it, Simon," I whispered. "And from here, the world is ours." And to you, listening now, thank you for walking this journey with me. If you want to hear more stories of resilience, betrayal, and the strength it takes to rise again, make sure to subscribe and stay with us for what comes next.